knowing now what we've seen, and one of the reasons why I did recommend it is because I don't think it's talked about enough. And with the stuff we've seen in the political climate of things and people starting to erase history or to gloss over it even more than it was even when I was a kid. To say that, maybe slavery was just, just some hard times that everybody got over.
Welcome to another episode of Cover2Cover Podcast. I am your host, Jarryn Bingham. In today's episode, we explore the historical fiction or nonfiction. I guess we'll discover that upon the episode.
Something like that.
We dive into the book of Jubilee by Margaret Walker. Margaret Walker is a poet, and this is her first and only novel. And I am here to discuss this wonderful book with one of my dear friends, Miss Erinn Jones. How are you doing, Miss Erinn?
I'm good. How you doing?
I am well. I'm not going to be screaming too much. I know what I just did right there.
You're all right.
Right here by the mic. But you said you're good. I wanted just to thank you for giving me your time today. Also, thank you for recommending this book. When you had first mentioned it, I remember sitting back. I was like, okay, cool. Like, I really do enjoy Black history. And, to be able to jump into a book, especially a book dealing with slavery, to be able to jump into it so early in the year, and the book just so beautifully written. Yes. I just want to thank you for the recommendation.
Well, thank you for reading it.
And I'm eager to want to know what made you want to pick this book.
It's probably what this was required reading for me in the 10th grade.
Okay.
And so when I read it, it was only me and one other student that actually read the entire book.
Yeah. Okay.
And
sounds about right.
And it was a book I was like, I don't know why, but I want to read it again. And I've read it about 5 times.
5 times?
Yes.
So the first time was in 10th grade?
Yes.
How in...
Just every few years, I'd always just revisit it again. I was never... I hated history. Yeah. Hated it.
Okay.
And this gave me more satisfaction.
Yeah.
Reading this, and this felt more like history to me than actually going to history class. So.
I definitely agree. Like the way that the book was structured, with the 3 acts. Yeah. First act being antebellum slavery, second act being the Civil War, and the third act being Reconstruction and reaction. It was just brilliantly structured, and I think that I can see why it was a required read, because I feel like you can truly get a good in-depth and overview of the mid-1800s with this book alone.
Yes.
And so I've really enjoyed everything about this book. And so with that, I proposed a couple of questions to you, and one of the questions was, or not even a question, but more so like, give me a specific moment in each act that really kind of moved you, and why.
I think what got me, even the very beginning of it, is so vivid. It's very vivid. It gets like right into it. Yeah. And it's talking about, the story is about Vyry and her experiencing the 1800s, growing up as a kid, growing up as a biracial slave. Yeah. And it doesn't start there. What I've found out, even with watching movies, I love a good backstory. I need to know why somebody is the way they are. And the book jumps right into her mom right before she passes away. And her dying wish is to see her last child that was born. And that's how Vyry comes on the scene. And it's like, wow. And there's so much to unpack even with that. The book vividly describes Vyry's mom, Hedda, and how she started off as basically his concubine.
Yes. Like her, it's funny because on my notes, I literally have it as it's not my key moment, but it's an honorable mention.
Sheesh. Because
the way, and he kind of even goes into this, or Margaret goes into description. Sister Hedda, who's the mother of Vyry, she says that she's 29 years old and she's had 15 single births.
Yes.
And so you can just do the math on that. And it's just, her intent is sad. But like you said, like that's just kind of how Margaret opened the book up. Like, yo, this is the life we're about to explore. And here it is.
Yes.
500 pages of it. And this is only literally the first chapter.
Yes.
So yes, that was one of my honorable mentions, was how the book was opened.
Yes, that's what really gripped me. And it was just, you didn't get this in history class. They glossed over slavery majority of the time. You heard of Frederick Douglass and, Peanuts, all this stuff. And it's just
George
like,
Carver,
okay,
yeah.
well, what else was there?
Yeah.
And for the book to open up that way, for the book to vividly describe what exactly, like a chronological view of, okay, so Hedda was this master's concubine. After he got her pregnant, and he was given to the master as a child first.
Yeah.
He was in his teens. And then after she was pregnant, the master was like, okay, well, let's get you a husband to make it look honorable.
Yeah.
So there's a black man who has to watch his wife essentially be raped by his master.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah. It ties so much back to the black community and why we are the way we are in a lot of ways, and how we've repeated a lot of the same patterns and the complicit things that we allow to happen and don't even know.
Yeah.
So anyway, that got me like right off the bat.
Right off the bat. Okay, cool. Yeah, I like I said, that was one of my. I know I said one. It's very difficult to kind of keep it at one. Like when I was just going through, it's 59 chapters or 58 chapters in total.
Yes.
And like each act is just packed with a variety of just beautiful stories, beautiful characters. Another honorable mention, and I'm gonna get to mine, was when Aunt Sally in chapter 7, when Aunt Sally was sold off.
Yes.
That was the first time in the book where I felt like I had lost somebody personally. Because up to that point, Aunt Sally was essentially the mother to Vyry, right? Vyry, she's born at the top of chapter 1. Mother dies during labor, and she just goes throughout life on this plantation, and Aunt Sally is the only mom she knows. And so, Aunt Sally's, of course, stern, because at the same time, Aunt Sally just kind of knows. Like, Aunt Sally has years, she's seen everything.
Yeah.
And so for her to be sold, especially the way she was sold, it was one of those things where I didn't cry. I cried at the end of this book, but I didn't cry. It was one of those things where I was just kind of like, okay, like I'm connected. I'm tied into Vyry and everything that's going on in her life.
Yeah.
But I guess the moment that I really wanted to highlight in Act 1 was from chapter 15, where we have Vyry and Randall Ware. Now, Randall Ware, he's, for the audience, of course, it's spoilers. Of course, I'm sorry I'm saying this, but 10 minutes into the podcast episode. But so Randall Ware is a free man. He comes on the plantation by way of work, and he ends up having a fondness for Vyry. They ultimately start connecting with each other, and then there was a segment that I wanted to jump into real fast in page 1. Well, in mine is page 152. But at this point, Randall Ware and Vyry have, they've had kids, they've had their ups and downs. He's promised her freedom, in terms of, I'm a free man, I can buy you, marry me, things like that.
Yeah.
Of course, all of those things have been failures up to this point. And so here at page 142, she says, before she was 20, she had 2 more children, and one of them was dead. Dead before it was born, and there was no grief within her, nor tears shed. That was the one who would never be a slave. She accepted death and the fate of her unborn child, as she had come to accept her life. She was dull to all feeling and nothing new. The same years were passing without hope. The same seasons were arriving on the heels of each other. From Randall Ware, she was asking nothing anymore, and she expected nothing. He was like everything else, around her and everybody else she accepted. He was part of the scenery. There was no joy in her life. There had never been, and she wondered if there ever would be. So, one paragraph,
right?
right. You know, but it was one of those things that Vyry's broken spiritually and emotionally. You know, not only are you having to deal with the trauma of losing a child, but in a way to, I guess, kind of ease the relative, ease the pain is you're somewhat happy for the child because he doesn't have to experience slavery, which is still very sad within itself. You know, you had to die and that's good for you. And you didn't even get a chance to really experience the world. And so that was one of those things where at the same time as deep and as sombering as it was, I felt that Vyry was going to be okay. Because up to that point, she had endured so much. She had seen so much, too, because I think at this time, one of the other slave girls, Lucy, had run off, was branded, things like that. Yes. But that was one of the key moments, or if the key moment to me in Act 1, just because I was like, okay, this woman is going through a lot, and it's only the end of Act 1, so there's plenty much more for her to go through. Yes. And so with that being the case, it leads us to our second act.
Before you get into
talk to me.
I want to touch on something that I think is an unpopular opinion after reading it so many times.
Oh.
I don't think so. Of course, Randall Ware is Vyry's husband. Mm-hmm. She has children with him. Things like that. We're her first husband. She has children with him. It seems that she loves him. I don't think she loved him.
I agree. I think she loved the freedom that he kept promising.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So yeah. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Because she was so enamored at the fact that the way he was able to walk around, mm-hmm. and he was promising these things. He was very articulate, very educated, and so I agree with you. Definitely was with him because of the things that he could potentially provide,
right.
instead of provision and comfort in that given moment.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with you on that matter.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I thought about that. I was like, I just really, the more I looked back into it, I was like, no, it wasn't love. I don't think even that she had moments where she was able to be happy at all. So everything seemed transactional.
Yeah.
And so Randall Ware was her way out. It wasn't.
Randall Ware was one of my favorite characters, man. I really liked Randall.
I loved him. I loved him too. I loved him too. He was very much, for him to have so much confidence as a black man in that time period, he was a great man. As far as Vyry is concerned, that chemistry wasn't there to me.
Yeah. Which is funny because like the way it's circled back around in Act 3, it's I think it's one of my Act 3 moments. Okay. But yeah. So, what other punches do you have in Act 2? Mm-hmm. Well, what stood out to you in Act 2?
Let me go to my notes. A few of them.
That was that made you say, Like I said, we are at the Civil War years with this act. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yes, Civil War. Yes. Honestly, going back to the historic aspect of it, because again, I cannot stress enough how much I hated history. Matter of fact, that was the reason why I did not graduate on time.
Okay.
I failed history twice.
Okay.
Because I knew it wasn't the history that we were supposed to be learning about, and it did not matter to me.
Okay.
So, the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Civil War happens. All of the slaves either die on the plantation, or run away.
Yeah.
The master's passed away, which is Vyry's dad, biological father,
Master John,
and he's holding over her head the fact that he can make her free, and it's in his will, but he has to die first. It's then his wife, who hated Vyry because she looked like her sister, mm-hmm. who was her half sister. It was just such a convoluted version of family that Vyry was put in, because she saw her sister, who was white,
Lillian,
get treated like she was somebody.
Yeah.
And then Vyry get treated like she's a slave, but they look the same.
They look the same. And then it made Big Missy upset because people would visit the house and ask if they were sisters.
Yes.
Big Missy hated that.
Yes.
And yeah, even at the same time, even in Act 2, they were around the same age of Lillian, who's the sister, is getting ready to get married to Kevin. Mm-hmm. And so you see, traditionally, opinions being what they are, traditionally, setting up for marriage, legacy, building the family. Right. Whereas on the contrast, you had the Randall Ware and Vyry situation, where it's, it's not set up as perfect. It's not necessarily legacy, even though those things were kind of promised. But it was just two entirely different environments for two girls who had grown up on the exact same plantation, who were essentially the same people, same father, just a different mother.
Yes, and that changed everything just from that perspective. And so that all that happens, everybody dies. Then her sister Lillian gets sick. And Vyry is taking care of everyone at this point. And she's one of the only slaves that has not left the plantation.
At this point, she's like Aunt Sally. Right. Where like everybody looks up to her, right. and it's, I have the exact same thing for my Act 2. Mm-hmm. Because Lillian's, so the family tree, for the people out there who haven't read the book yet, on the plantation, you have Master John and his wife, Big Missy. Their two children, Johnny and Lillian, and Vyry's the stepdaughter, or she's a slave daughter, and so like that's the world that she's in. So throughout the Civil War, Big Master John dies at the top of Act 2.
He does, yes.
Stubborn bastard. He needed to go anyway. And then after, it was the younger John had died in war. Mm-hmm. Kevin, Lillian's wife, had come back and I believe died of war-related wounds. And Lillian's husband, I got you. And then Big Missy had died of a stroke. Yes. The last three all died in like a matter of months. And so like Lillian her entire world has been shaken up. Because up to this point, the only thing she's truly known was the plantation she's grown up with, moved maybe 20 miles out to live with Kevin as he's gotten his life in. Then the Civil War comes, she moves back to the house. And then, like I said, all of her family's gone in a matter of months. And the only person there left with her was Vyry, who had, like I said, grown up with her on the same plantation. And now Vyry's in the position of caretaker. And the thing that, it just made me love Vyry even more because she had every right to be like, bitch, I'm out. And
yes, that was just what I was about to get into. Yeah. And the fact that after all that aftermath happens, then the Emancipation Proclamation is declared over this plantation. The Union soldiers come and they say, "Hey, you have to free all your slaves," and they ask Lillian, "Well, how many slaves are there?" She's like, 5.
And I think when they referenced it at the top of the book, it was roughly 40, right? Yes. At the top. So yeah, like it was.
It went from 40 to 5, and we're talking about 5 included Vyry, her two children,
Jim and Mina.
Mm-hmm. And was it? No, Jim came back later. I want to say Maylisa.
I forgot about her.
And there was one more slave, but anyway, it was 5 of them. Mm-hmm. And so they read the Emancipation Proclamation. Of course, no one understands what's being said. Yeah. But the book captures Vyry taking pieces of it. But her son, Jim, understands what's going on. So he's dancing, he's happy and all this other kind of stuff. But what gripped me was the fact that right after that was said, Jim was like, "We're free, Ma, we can go." And so she was like, "Yeah, we free, but we still got to work."
And that's the thing too, like.
It was like, Jesus, that is happening today.
The psychology for slaves at the time, like, well, we're free. Okay, well, now what's next? Right. Like, what does that even look like?
What is that? Where do I go?
Who do I talk to about this freedom?
Nothing.
How do we set it up? How does, it's, you're uneducated too. Yes. And so,
she goes straight. She literally goes straight from they declare her being free to the Union soldiers coming in and ransacking the entire place. and she calming everybody down and saying, I'm going to cook you food.
Yeah.
She cooks all day,
All
right
day.
after the Emancipation Proclamation, saying that she's free. It's like, and she's like, well, there is literally nothing else for me to do other than stay here and cook for y'all.
Yeah, that was, like I said, that was one of those things that you just sit back and at this point, you're so deep into the story, you're so deep into the character's psychology that you feel overwhelmed at a certain point.
Yeah.
Because again, like I said, you're free now. The emancipation, what's this big word that everybody's saying? But apparently, I'm free. That also, when the Union soldiers came back and ransacked the entire place and kind of got everything situated, that led to one of my honorable mentions in Act 2, which was Mr. Ennis Brown.
Yes.
He comes on. So Mr. Ennis Brown was a former slave, and after
It's a field hand.
Field hand? Mm-hmm. Not on that plantation though, was he?
No.
Yeah,
he was on a different plantation.
And so after the Civil War had concluded, the Union soldiers were going around, letting all the slaves know, essentially that you guys are free. They went to the plantation where Vyry was at, and Ennis was there, and he stayed. And one of the things about Ennis that he kind of said was, and he kind of alluded to it at the end of the book. I hate to kind of jump all the way to Act 3, but when he said it, you could already feel it when it was happening in Act 2. But he says, this is when he's having a conversation with Randall Ware at the very end of Act 3.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Okay.
But he's like, here was the first time I ever seen a colored family and what looked like there was a loving wholeness together, a family what slavery had never broken nor killed. I just couldn't leave there until I know what was going to become of them. And so when, I really did like Ennis, especially near the end.
Yeah.
But that's all that I had on Act 2, which was, of course, like I said, that was Civil War. It was just in Act 2, it was just a lot of conversation about what was going on in the war. We saw a lot of development with Randall Ware's character because he, at the same time, was also having a situation where he was a free black man. He had a trade, but it didn't matter in a way. Yeah. And so he ended up joining the Union Army and, fighting for his true freedom, which is crazy because again, he was a free black man. But that's all I have at Act 2. Are you good on Act 2? You got any other points on that one?
Well, just adding in with that, so Vyry hadn't seen Randall for years. We're talking about almost a decade. And there had just been letters back and forth sent by a preacher. I can't think of
Brother Zeke?
Brother Zeke, yes. Brother Zeke would send, because he was able to move about just because he was a preacher, and he would send letters back and forth for nearly a decade between Vyry and
Remember there was a time too where, remember Willie? He was they called him touched in the head.
Yeah.
Where she has sent a letter to him. She had sent a letter with Willie to Randall Ware. It was I forgot the chapter, and again, you have to read the book. It's just a really good book. But that sequence where Willie was trying to get the letter to Randall and then back without even getting caught, because ultimately Vyry was trying to set up Randall, and they were trying to get Randall to set up her to be bought because she was about to be auctioned.
Right.
But she wasn't auctioned. It was Willie who was auctioned later on in that chapter. I felt bad for Willie. He was such an in and out character. And it was just so unfortunate too, because I'm sure there's just hundreds and thousands of other stories of other Willies who just never really just truly became of anything, but still has such a significant role in a way in these larger character stories.
Yeah.
So I really, Act 2 was probably my favorite act.
Same. It was probably, like I said, the most I could understand of history.
Yeah.
In that piece. And then just knowing the fact that Vyry was at such a loss because at this point, there were no men on the plantation.
Yeah.
So when Ennis Brown came in and he essentially saved their family, it was kind of like, I have no choice. This man, I know I'm waiting on Randall all this time.
She was waiting on Randall, yeah.
But I don't know if he's dead. I don't know what's up with him. But this man he's here and he's willing to take on me and whatever I got going on. And she had 2 children. Yeah. And he was there.
Yeah, I really did like Ennis. And then this was I think, nearing the end of Act 2, they were moving from, I think, middle Georgia to like the southeastern part of Georgia, trying to go to Alabama. I think they were at Troy at one point. But yeah, I think that kind of jumps a little bit more into our next act. Yes. The final act, Act 3, which deals with the Reconstruction and reaction. I had like 100 honorable mentions, of course. Act 3, even though I said Act 2 was my favorite act, Act 3 was just so much. Yeah. I mean, like I said, Ennis and Vyry had moved to Alabama. They were harassed by the Klan. Yes. They were forced out of 2 houses. Yes. The second house almost broke Vyry.
Yes.
Yes. This is where I thought was just so brilliant on Vyry. So Randall Wells talking to her, he says, "I figured too when I came that I could offer you everything, and I can. Anything your heart desires, Vyry. Fine home, money, education for our children, everything." She shook her head. "Big house don't matter to me. I was a slave in a big house, and I knows that don't mean no warm, loving home and peaceful night's sleep. Your money was always going to buy everything, even much me and my freedom, but it was a dream, Randall Ware. I tells you it was nothing but a dream." At this point, I'm like, I mean, it's already, she's seen it all.
Yes.
She's seen it all.
Yes.
Randall's popped back up on the scene, and Randall, to his credit, was fighting like hell to get back. He even came back to the former plantation to confine Vyry, but, of course, to no avail. But for Vyry to sit back and be like, Ennis was with me through all of it, ups and downs, births. She had lost a child with Ennis, too.
Yes, yes.
And so, she wasn't persuaded by anything that Randall could buy her. Right. Okay, you said that you could buy my freedom at one point. Like, you want to give me a big house? I've lived in a big house, and it was the first traumatic thing that was written in the book was when Big Missy had hung Vyry in the closet. Yes. That was, so, again, that happened in the big house. Yes. So, Vyry, even with no formal education, still knowing that possessions aren't going to do it.
Right.
It really is about the character.
Right.
And Ennis really did have that character. Ennis really did stick through with 2 houses, Klan attacks, miscarriages. And so ultimately, even going back to one of Ennis's quotes where he was like, they looked like when he first saw Vyry and her 2 kids, he was like, they looked like a loving family that slavery never could kill. I wanted to essentially be a part of that, for him to kind of just keep his head down, do the job that he needed to do as a man. It was beautiful to see it in that way. I'm glad that she picked Ennis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, for him to not have he didn't have a family.
Yeah.
He had lost all of his family as well. So he worked hard to keep that together. Yeah. Because he wanted it so bad. Yeah. It was Ennis's heart.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, she saw that.
Because even when Ennis was having problems with Jim, Vyry's firstborn child by Randall, that back and forth still didn't break the fondness that Ennis had for the overall family. Yeah. Even though it caused much conflict between him and Vyry, because he had tried to whip Jim. If not, he did whip Jim one time. And Vyry vehemently just kind of like snapped on him. Yes. Ultimately finding out why when he saw the marks on her back. Yeah. So it's this book, man. This book was such a blessing. I found myself at times when I was reading it throughout the weeks, if I wasn't reading it, I found myself missing Vyry. So I'd be doing whatever I was doing throughout the day. I'm like, man, I need to like jump in that book to see what happened next. Yeah. And even for it to have been as thick of a book as it was a very easy read, just because Margaret Walker is just beautiful with how she writes. Yes. And it actually makes me want to kind of dive deeper into her poetry. Just because it's just see how she was able to really craft things with this book here.
She said it took her 30 years to make this.
Yeah.
Yeah. To write this.
I saw a couple of interviews with her, and I know Vyry was based off of her great grandmother. Yeah. So this was it's automatically made it like one of my favorite books ever.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah. I'm probably gonna read it again sometime over the next couple of years, just because, like I said, it's a very good story from 1835 to 1870.
Yeah.
So you really get a good understanding, like I said, of the mid 1800s. What do you feel about, this is kind of a side question, but slave movies? What do you feel about slave movies in 2024? Sheesh. Should we continue to produce them, Miss Actress? Should they continue to be on the slates, or are we good on slave movies?
If it's not like this, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would say that as far as slave movies goes, it's so focused on the brutality of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Even Roots, we remember the lashes.
Yeah.
To personify real love stories, real people living lives, real people having to endure certain things. I've never seen a slave movie that so beautifully depicted a very beginning, middle, and end
Mm-hmm.
like this book. If it's not like this, I wouldn't want it. Anything else other than that, we've seen before.
Yeah.
We've seen the brutality. And what I loved about this book is there was no white savior.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was nobody there to save Vyry.
Yeah.
It was her recognizing, I can finally breathe at the end.
Yeah.
Knowing that as much as I've endured, I made the right decision. I made the right decisions to lead me to this place, and I'm still here to be able to pass something down different to my children. And I've never seen a slave movie that does that in the end.
Yeah. What? How old was Vyry at the end of the book? Can we say she was late 20s?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, if that's the case, then we go back to the very beginning of the book where her mother, Sister Hedda, was 29 when she gave birth to Vyry and died ultimately. I like full circle moments like that.
Me too.
And so, man, yeah, such a good book, such a great book. I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have this question that I pose to everyone who sits in and chops it up with me.
Yes.
You've recommended Miss Margaret Walker's Jubilee to me. Mm-hmm. If you could recommend it to one other person, who would that be and why?
One other, when I thinking about this question, honestly, I can't do one person.
Okay.
I would recommend it to 10th graders.
Yeah.
Knowing now what we've seen, and one of the reasons why I did recommend it is because I don't think it's talked about enough. Mm-hmm. And with the stuff we've seen in the political climate of things and people starting to erase history or to gloss over it even more than it was even when I was a kid.
Yeah.
To say that, maybe slavery was just, just some hard times that everybody got over. Like, no. This is, if you go back to the underlining themes of this book, you can see it tie back to a lot of the ideals that we deal with today.
Yes.
And I think that it would give a good context to our history to high schoolers.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would recommend it to high schoolers. Even though it's heavy in some of the elements of it, I think, if they can handle Sexy Red and, you know what I mean, they can, and Cardi B and stuff, they can handle Jubilee.
I agree with that. You said something that actually, you said something just now. God, I forgot already off the top of my head. Oh, you were saying how people were glossing over slavery.
Yes.
Essentially, I remember even in the political climate where the Republican candidate Nikki Haley had said the Civil War wasn't about slavery, and it's at times I find myself, I'm like, I don't want to entertain dumb shit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's power in people's words. You're a political representative who has this national platform running for the highest form of office. and, to gloss over something that was very intricate in your country's fabric, try to just make it seem like it.
It was the economy.
Yeah, it is the economy. But
Facts.
yeah, it's books like this, and I really do love what you just said. Like, recommended it to the younger generation just because, to me, this book was about perseverance, and books in general motivate people. And like I said earlier in the conversation, I really do enjoy reading Black history. And the majority of the books that I read, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Black Panthers, like a lot of activists in the 60s and 70s. When you see the sacrifices that were made, when you understand what people had to go through, when you see what real people had to push through.
Yes.
And again, I'm 33 years old. Vyry's 29. She lived way more like catastrophic things happening in her life than my own 33 years of existence. But it's one of those things where I'm able to read the book, process it, and then be grateful in my day-to-day. And that inspires me to want to push myself more than I did, because I, kind of like you, I wasn't that big of a history fan in high school, mainly because, we're just talking about kind of like the same most redundant things that you talk about in history class. It was, I really fell in love with reading in my early 20s, specifically Black history. And I'm just like, this actually happened.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
These people actually pushed through these things.
Yes.
And the majority of these guys had less of an education than I do today.
Yes.
And so, one of the things that we find in the book, in general, when it came to slavery, was just, they were always, especially in Act 3, where the conversation was about the education of slaves and, people, not even education, the education of freedmen, and penalties for teaching Black people how to read and write. For the ability to read a book and process that information and grow as a person, for that to have been hindered during those times to where we are now, that's why I would probably answer my question I asked you of who I would recommend this to. I would definitely recommend it to the younger generation, specifically high schoolers, because again, it gives you a very good overview of what life was like for people who look like you less than 200 years ago.
Yes.
And so,
and it was white people too.
Yeah.
It gave everyone's perspective.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, the book opened up with Master's perspective.
Yeah.
And what was passed down to him. It was a very thorough view of everybody's perspective. And I think a lot of times we look at the subject of slavery and we're just like, beatings and marster and all these different broken English, and I don't want to do any of this stuff. But at the same time, it makes me think about a conversation I had with someone who was from Ghana.
Okay.
And there's always that thing with people who with Africans that move here from Africa to America. And the first time I'd ever heard this was a few years ago. He said, "You know what? Honestly, we owe so much to the African Americans for enduring what they endured, or we wouldn't have been able to come here."
Yeah.
Vyry was one of those trailblazers.
Yeah.
If we're making her into a context of she actually lived, she actually endured, so that we could, not only just us, but people who look like us from other countries who experience less than could come here and experience at least something different, something better, some type of success. I know there's still a lot going on there. We're still so far behind in a lot of ways. I mean, like you said, less than 200 years ago, people couldn't read.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we still have we have a ways to go, but us just being able to endure this is like, man, I don't even, it also bothers me that one little quote that you'll hear, like, I'm not my ancestor. Do you really think after reading this book, do you really think you weren't? You would never. You could never.
Yeah. Yeah.
The agricultural know-how, all those things. Those were things we.
It's just it's. Again, it goes back to the perseverance of the matter. There was I had it in my notes here somewhere. Let me find it real quick. I think it was page 152, going back to that little segment again.
Oh, yes.
But it's when people sit back and say that they're not their ancestors, I definitely think that's a foolish statement on so many accounts. But in the middle of that segment that I read earlier, it said that Vyry she thought that the same years were passing without hope. Years, 365 days times however you want to look at years, but to go years without hope. Wow. I know a lot of people who go a couple of weeks and it's just the end of the world to them. Right. Chick went years without hope, yes, and still was able to just find a way to just keep her head down and just be honest. And then even in her like most vulnerable moments where she had no answers and she just cry out to God, cry out to the sky at night, there was still fight in her.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing that one can get from reading. Again, and, when you dive into your history and you get an understanding of what your people went through, and it may not even been for us. It just was just going for themselves. It's survival.
They couldn't think about the next generation. They just think about the next day.
That's all they could think about, the next day, just getting to the next day. It's a different world. So yeah, you're not your ancestors. You're fortunate enough that you're not your ancestors.
Correct. Yes.
And what they had to endure.
Yes.
But yes. I was very happy to have read this book and then had the opportunity to review it and then come sit down, talk to on the podcast with someone who read it 5 times.
I have, yes.
5 times. Yeah, okay. I don't know if I'm going to get to that point.
Well, like I said, I got a little head start. Like I said, starting at 10th grade. Yeah. So, got a little head start.
Well, Miss Erinn, it has been a joy here to have you on the Cover2Cover podcast. I'm appreciative. I again, what a good book does to me, it just really kind of keeps. It's like a good pit stop. Yeah. And in life, it's just you're going around the track. You're constantly doing what you need to do, but every once in a while, you need to kind of pull up, stop, get the tires changed, oil changed, all those things to get back out there, because you have to go back out there.
You have to, yes.
And it's books like this that make it easier to go back out there as a Black man, because again, Jubilee, just like you said, it was such a thorough breakdown of every character. There was several characters we didn't even mention, because even the dynamic of white people at the time, we had Master John and you had Grimes.
Yes.
Grimes
he was a whole nother thing. Yeah. And they weren't even the same type of guy. And then even Master John, he wasn't even that much of a tyrant. He didn't want to be this guy.
Yeah.
He didn't want to, he literally didn't want to treat Vyry any different from his own child. He literally just had to. It was because I'm white. I guess I'm white and I own a plantation. I guess that's what you got to do.
Yeah, man. We're going to get you back on the show.
Okay.
We're going to get you back on the show. Season 2.
I'm here for it.
But again, ma'am, I thank you so much. And do you have anything you want to say to anybody in reference to Miss Jubilee and Miss Margaret Walker?
This book is highly recommended. I'm not someone that just sits down and reads books, especially lately. I feel bad saying that, but I have an Audible subscription, and I listen to. Once I found out I can just listen to books, it's been bad. But sitting down and actually opening the pages and reading this, I can do this as much as possible. That in the Bible, but only in sections, because there's entirely too much going on there. You have a lot to unpack with the Bible.
Yeah.
But yes.
Well. Thank you, Miss Erinn, again. I hope you have a good week.
You too.
And this was another episode of the Cover2Cover Podcast. Again, you need to find you a book. Yes. You need to read it. You need to process it. and then move on to the next one. I'm Jarryn Bingham. I'll see you guys next time.